Record.
Hello, my name is Alex and we are Team Chaz.
My name is Andrea.
I'm Chaz.
I'm Georgia.
I'm Lazuli.
And I'm Phoenix.
So to start, the architectural structure our group chose is the Ark of Septimius Severus. The location of the Ark is in the North African city of Leptis Magna in Libya today. To be more specific, as seen in the images of the Ark and the map illustration from the map archive, the structure is a four-way arc with two main Roman roads crossing through all four directions of the Ark's passageways, one of which led directly into the center of the city. Septimius Severus was a Roman emperor, and his rule spanned from the year 193 to 211 AD, according to Gerari's journal article, Septimius Severus, the Roman Emperor, 193 to 211 AD. Septimius was foreign-born in the city of Leptis Magna, so he was the first ever of any Roman emperor who was African. According to Hammond, in the article Septimius Severus, Roman bureaucrat, the poet Statius indicates the inherent prejudice against non-Roman people, especially against Septimius, since he was considered North African, and that was often held against him. However, he also pays him a compliment for his endeavors despite this. In pages 141 to 142, Hammond mentions, quote, Septimius embarked successfully on the practice of law. Despite his success, he remained content with equestrian rank. The Sermo Poenius and Externa Mens suggest that Septimius may have been of non-Roman stock, though a Roman family resident abroad might easily have been absorbed into its environment sufficiently to have acquired the generally spoken language and provincial point of view, end quote. He traveled to Rome at a young age, and at first did not have any interest in joining the Senate, but eventually, before he became emperor, he did become a senator during the rule of Marcus Aurelius. During the Civil War, shortly after Commodus was murdered in the year 192, Septimius traveled to Rome. He defeated the Praetorian Guard and was then backed by the support of the Senate, which resulted in him officially becoming emperor. Gerari also mentions that Septimius Severus commissioned Hellenized Greek-speaking artists from the coast to create his buildings. Leptis Magna was one of the most significant North African Phoenician cities. It was said to have been established around the 6th century, which was right after the victory of Carthage. This is when Rome took over North Africa. As a result, this eventually led Leptis Magna to become Romanized. This was also when Trajan gave citizenship to the natives of Leptis Magna. The city of Leptis Magna was important because it was a major place of trade. Gerari states, Italian immigrants with business or agricultural interests started to come to North Africa. Therefore, the city became a growing and bustling city of much importance in regular trade. So next, Andrea will talk more on the thesis.
The thesis. We are attempting to prove the connection between the arch and that the directions to which its four crossroads lead to are the directions of other Roman cities, and that the barbarians depicted on each of the sides are actual icons that indicate the direction and the city that travelers are heading towards. Much of the evidence we pulled to support our theory comes from two scholars, Eric S. Grunes and Jessica Faye Hughes. Hughes's argument strengthens the known use of personification on the Hadrianium, and Grunes' description of the Arch of Carpentras sets a precedent for our theory, as monuments of barbarians have been used to show geographical placement. Moving on to our additional points. Our first question upon inspecting the arch is, why is there a lack of inscription? Most Roman arches had some type of writing or dedication. Our theory relies partially on the experience of a variety of foreign travelers to Leptis Magna. There would have been Romans, Greeks, Africans, people of the Levant, and further through the Middle East, crossing through the arch and looking upon it. According to an article written by the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica, some common languages in the area would have been Hebrew, Moabite, Phoenician, and Punic. We believe many people of this time were either illiterate or that many people wouldn't understand Latin because of where they are coming from, making Inscription a waste of space that could be used for powerful imagery that would be understood regardless of language. To add to our thesis, we want to elaborate about the arch and the icons on it. We believe the barbarians are literal icons that indicate the city and the direction that travelers were heading towards. They are Roman conquests, hence why the pairings of barbarians with trophies. We know these are barbarians by the way they are dressed, such as wearing Phrygian caps, and that they are captured barbarians, indicating lands that Rome has conquested. According to Fred Kleiner's A History of Roman Art, Septimius Severus became emperor in 193 AD, and after defeating a Roman-Syrian rival the following year, and the Parthians, Severus gained more colonies in the Middle East and a war victory to boast about and to solidify his place as a Roman emperor. If the barbarians wearing the Phrygian caps indicate the direction of Carthage, then those barbarians wearing the Middle Eastern keffiyeh headdress must be an indication of Septimius's victory over the Parthians and the inclusion of new Middle Eastern territories into the empire. In an article by Jonah Lendering, the crossroads at the arch were the Cardo and the Decamenes, which were roads that started in Alexandria, Egypt, and continued on to Carthage, meaning that Leptis Magna was a major road step, and that the directions of the arch did point to other territories of the empire. This was an important move for Severus to have this arch in this location, his hometown in Libya, as it was a Roman colony that was not always considered Roman enough for his peers in Rome. He was making a statement that the colonies were worthy enough to be part of the empire just as much as the Italian peninsula, and that Leptis Magna was an important Roman city.
So we see some traditional Roman elements along the front of the arch in this elevation. We see winged Roman victories approaching the front archway, the front passage of the arch. We see battlefield trophies erected at the front of the arch, and we see captive barbarians at the foot of these battlefield trophies. Next slide, please. So identifying who these barbarians are and where they came from has been difficult. There has been some conjecture that these are all Parthians based on the way they're dressed. However, in the words of Prescott W. Townsend in The Significance of the Arch of Severus Leptis, though the armor and costumes of the prisoners of the Arch of Leptis is certainly characteristic of Parthian, as a comparison with the reliefs of the Arch, Septimius in the Roman Forum will show, it should be noted that a similar type of costume was commonly worn by other barbarian enemies of Rome. So we see here not Parthians, but rather people who are enemies of Rome. Identifying that further, we see a mixture of different barbarian tropes combining here. So if you look to the right on the trophy itself, those are not Parthian shields, but they are Germanic shields. Jonah Lendering of Livius.org writes, the hexagonal shields are not Parthian. They were popular among tribes of warriors from Germany. So we see here a mixture of different cultures to this one visual image. However, it would seem strange that so much time and dedication was placed into these captive barbarians when we traditionally see barbarians as, lesser specimens, and that they all look distinctly different from each other. And we believe that they are trying to communicate something here. The male we see on the left we believe to be wearing a kepha. It is a traditional Middle Eastern headdress. And the female on the right, we believe to be wearing a Phrygian cap. Next slide, please. So if you were to follow where they are facing, the male wearing the Middle Eastern headgear is facing to the east. The woman wearing the Phrygian cap is facing towards Carthage, whom we found to have a connection to the hat. And we believe on the left side, we see a barbarian facing southwest. We believe to be a Phoenician. Yeah. And this is how we attempted to gather all of our information. It was difficult pinpointing exactly where each of these captive barbarians were, but to the best of our knowledge, we have them each facing the correct direction.
So in our works that we looked into to make sure that we are accurate with our theory, we looked at the Primaporta. We primarily gained information from the lecture on February 12th of 2020. On the Primaporta, on Augustus's breastplate, on the left side in this circle, we have Hispania. It's the personification of Hispania. In the center, we see a Parthian returning the standards to a Roman. We recognize the Roman as Roman because it has Fido on the side of it, which is indicative of Rome. And then on the right-hand side, we have Gallia. Above in the relief, we have the sun god Sol, and according to my notes in lecture, it was personifications of night and day, or dawn and dusk, but other scholars also might believe that Pax Romana is up here at the top right as well. This is something that we found indicates early on allegorical imagery being used to convey a message from an emperor. And so the easiest way to do so is by creating personifications of place with physical additions that indicate such a place. Next, to make sure that we understood them to truly be barbarians, we looked to Gemma Augustea. So the depictions are located on the Arch of Septimius Severus, lower down beside the Corinthian columns. From what we learned in this lecture, also on February 12th, that the lower something is down on an artwork or monument, the less important that it is and the less revered that that subject may be. Therefore, we knew that they were likely not gods, and more than likely, definitely not family members of the Severan line. That is also confirmed in a reading by Townsend, the significance of the Arch of Severi of Leptis, where they look at the friezes at the top of the arch and confirm that it does show the family in triumphal procession. So if we look at the Gemma Augustea, we see similarities too of allegorical imagery. Next to Augustus, who is here sitting, is a relaxed image of Rome, personification of Rome. And so she's there with children to indicate fertility, and she's sitting, so everyone's seated indicates that it's peacetime and there's no war. And so down below we see barbarians and a triumph as well, indicating that they have been defeated and that Rome is capturing their city. Next we have the ARA Pacus. We compare the ARA Pacus depictions because they also include reliefs of Roma and Italia. On the left we have Roma, and on the right we have Italia, who is seated because of peacetime. We consider the work as a staple example of early and understood personifications of a geographical space. Additionally, we see that the ARA Pacus is an example of narration placed directly on a monument that coincides specifically to a direction. And so the viewer is made to understand that each side holds its own place in time, and that adds to the overall message that the monument gives. Essentially, it's a directional index for space because it includes these imageries, but Augustus wanted time. He wanted to place it within history. So he wanted Roma and Italia to be placed in a specific historical part of time in existence. And so with these allegorical figures, the monument places these two locations firmly within Roman history. Next, we have the Arch of Carpentras. So on the side of the arch is a relief of two barbarians. They are chained, their hands behind their back, and the links are looped around the trophies. In reading Gilbert Picard, everything's in French and I can't read the title, but in translating his literature, he goes on to explain that their clothing is markedly different, and this suggests that they do not come from the same culture. In reading Gilbert, he concluded that the one on the right is wearing a fur coat, which is indicative of Germain. The other individual on the left, is wearing a Phrygian cap, much like the one that we see on the Arch of Septimius Severus, and he indicates that as being Phrygian and Iranian. So the captives are depicted with their weapons of the same culture at their sides. Gilbert writes, quote, "The reliefs of Carpentras evoke both the defeat of Orientals and Nordics." A second observation was noted in reading Gruen, Gruen's cultural identity in ancient Mediterranean. They indicated that the captives may be facing the direction in which their land has been conquered. And so specifically the German is facing northwest and the Parthian is facing southeast, respectively. Gilbert dates this arch to the time of Augustus, which would mean that it falls well before Septimius Severus's time. Next, we have the Temple of Hadrian. Much of the evidence that we pull from here is from Jessica Fay Hughes's personifications in The Ancient Viewer, the Case of Hadrian Nations. So we strengthen the theory that the barbarian depictions found on the Arch of Septimius Severus could be literal personifications or an index for a city or culture in which the passerby is going towards from the interpretations of the 36 reliefs found on the Hadrianum. Each relief of a place, so we have Bithynia here, is checkered with a trophy relief, followed by the next place, which in this case I've placed Hispania for reference. So originally this was located in Campus Martius, and there were also no inscriptions to our knowledge. But again, each individual is wearing a traditional, in the Roman perspectives, garb and weaponry of a specific province or nation, as Hughes puts it. Hughes also argues that the images which are dispersed between trophy reliefs are to represent specific conquered nations or provinces with the explicit purpose of illustrating the power of Rome through iconography and regional stereotypes. And last, a hole in our theory that we thought about was, in order for the images to really hold stock, is for everyone in the provinces to really understand it. So in reading Barbarians on Roman Imperial Coins and Sculpture by Levy, who goes through pretty much a lot of Roman time and follows the coinage, barbarians were depicted very commonly on coins. Specifically, this coin is a good example for us. So in order for the imagery to be most efficient, everyone would need to know the references that are being made in them. So everyone spends money. Coinage is very important. So maybe some people in Rome, in the Roman Emperor, couldn't visit monuments nor have the full history behind them, but they would still understand the imagery as they spent money. In Levy's book, on page 27, they write, quote, "The coins representing small barbarian figures increase in number during the 3rd and 4th centuries and continue to last of the Western emperors. Little by little, the meaning of the type changes. First, the barbarian is a symbol of people recently vanquished by the emperor, and later the connection with an actual victory is less often found." And then later on page 42, the author focuses on the 3rd and 4th century specifically. They write that, quote, "It may be concluded that the continuity of these motifs on coins indicate a similar continuity in monumental official sculpture. Furthermore, the study of the barbarian attribute leads to the conclusion that such a continuity may be assumed in cases where extant remains, ancient reproductions of the monuments, products of sculpture, or of the minor arts in general are not as plentiful." And so they also went on to write that there's a surge of symbolic relief on coinage in Severin's time. The coin that you see here shows a ruler standing between two captives. The legend reads, the coin actually reads "Always Victorious" in Latin. And so the barbarian on the left has a traditional Oriental pointed cap, or the Phoenician cap. The barbarian on right has northern characteristics with an upper body that is naked. By including both, it indicates that the ruler holds power over both distant provinces, and they go in different directions. And so the writer also explains that, Levy also explains that other examples of such are mostly found in the first half of the 4th century, so following Septimius Severus' time. Yeah. You can also, they add that this can be found on the Arch of Constantine. So these motifs, including both of these regions, follow Septimius Severus and moves on into the 4th century. We believe that this indicates a transition in the use of barbarians, that they were used to indicate provinces and overall power of emperors and not specific victories, as we know that Septimius Severus really didn't hold as many as previous emperors.
Next is how we could expand on our research. The argument is that the barbarians are indicators of specific provinces. We did find that the shields above the trophies are hexagonal and are primarily used by Germanic soldiers, as stated in Barbarians and Their Equipment on Roman Provincial Sculpture by Fraser Hunter, but they also became more generically used. So to further expand our research, we could look more into the fluidity of barbarian cultures used in sculpture. We could also find more evidence of cases before the arch's construction in which barbarians were used as indicators for provinces they were facing. So we did, of course, mention the Arch of Carpentras, but we could also look into other arches or other pieces of sculpture that may also back up our theory. We could also look into the lack of inscriptions and the possibility of the inscription being painted on. According to previously cited source, Fred S. Kleiner's A History of Roman Art, all marble portraits in antiquity were painted. So we could further look into residual paint and sculpture and see if it also applied to monuments. And lastly, we can study the imagery on the rest of the arch to support our argument about the indication of other countries and places.
So in conclusion, I'll summarize the key points that we've made with our research. First, we started with we are explaining the Arc of Septimius Severus, which was erected in Leptis Magna, and it serves as an important architectural development that highlights the city's importance to the Roman Emperor Septimius, the self-proclaimed son of Marcus Aurelius, according to Kleiner, an African Roman emperor who was born and raised in the North African city of Leptis Magna and commissioned many architectural projects there. Leptis Magna was known as a trading hub where people of North African, Mediterranean, and Italian cultures often came, and according to Gerari, it became a major place of trade when Italian immigrants began to migrate there for agricultural and business needs. So conclusively, our thesis is that all roads intersecting at the Arch of Septimius Severus lead to Roman colonies. The barbarians are icons that indicate the city and direction travelers are headed towards. We came to this conclusion by comparing each of the barbarians on the arc and how their dress may indicate a direction, as well as the lack of inscriptions on the arc because the common language was Punic rather than Latin. Other languages also were spoken because the city was used for trade, such as Carthaginian and Phoenician. So it is reasonable that imagery would be used to guide travelers when no inscriptions were provided. As seen in the images of the arc and the map illustration from the map archive, the structure of the arc is four-way. It's also known as a quadriformes arc, with two main Roman roads crossing through all four directions of the arch's passageways. The imagery on each side includes reliefs at the top and trophies adorning the sides, with barbarians with their hands tied behind their backs at the bottom. We specifically analyzed the barbarians located at the bottom of the arc because of their dress and how each differs from the other. From this, we devised that this could possibly indicate that the imagery of the barbarians is used for directional purposes, since their dress differs slightly depending on which side they are located on. Lastly, we had to determine that there was other imagery similar to depictions of the barbarians on the Arc of Septimius Severus. So such examples were seen in the Primaporta, Gemma Augustea, and ARA Pacus that indicated time, symbolism, and location of barbarians on artwork, which they were normally placed at the bottom. The Arc of Carpentras specifically depicts barbarians with very different dresses, as well as directly indicates where they are facing and are indicative of the locations in which they are meant to represent. A very early example, it is also a very early example that took place before Septimius's time, in which he could have referenced. Another prominent example that was brought up was the barbarian imagery found on the Hadrianium, in which Hughes argues that the barbarians are representations of specific conquered nations, and there's a lack of inscription, meaning that this is a concept that must have been commonly known in order for people to understand what they were, thus providing another example of barbarians used symbolically to represent a location. We also debated that in order for the barbarians to be used as directional symbols, they would have to have been well known by the people who traveled in and out of Leptis Magna. An important piece of evidence is that common imagery of barbarians can be traced back to coins. Levy, as previously mentioned, author of Barbarians on Roman imperial coins, states that coins with this imagery increased during the 3rd and 4th centuries, coinciding with the creation of the ark and enhancing our idea that barbarians were common imagery for that time. With what we have so far, I think we would have enough to lead us towards a more definitive research path if we chose to continue this research further. And that is the conclusion.
Cool. Awesome.